Welcome to Honeywood Farm. Miranda, my wife, and I would like to welcome you to Bee Magic on behalf of the McGregor Magic Garden Festival. Bees and poetry are inextricably linked. The single-minded honesty of poetry is matched by the single-minded intent of bees in gathering nectar and pollen from flowers. Who can doubt W.B. Yeats when he talks about moving to the Lake Isle of Innisfree with lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore? Any garden must have bees, and anyone who loves a garden will love bees. To link the poetry and the bees and the sense of garden, I would like to turn briefly to a wonderful poet who wrote 5 special poems about bees and beekeeping. And I'd like just to hear the first stanza of her poem Wintering, read by Miranda.
Wintering by Sylvia Plath. This is the easy time, there is nothing doing. I have whirled the midwife's extractor, I have my honey, 6 jars of it, 6 cat's eyes in the wine cellar. Wintering in a dark without window, at the heart of the house next to the last tenant's rancid jam and the bottles of empty glitters. So-and-so's gin.
A lot of drones here. They obviously, I think the queen is...
There's one there.
Where, the queen?
Queen cell there.
Yeah. But then,
How do we qualify the value of bees in nature?
bees are nature. We cannot really have nature without bees. Bees developed long before man, and as flowers developed and needed pollination, so the bees developed with them. And we cannot even think about life in nature without bees.
What is the value of bees for agriculture and ultimately for humankind?
The food we eat, the very essential pollination which occurs to create seeds around which fruit grows, depends on the cross-pollination of bees. Our agricultural production today could not happen the way it does without managed hives pollinating crops. The almond crop, for example, depends up to 100% on bee pollination. We wouldn't have nuts, we wouldn't have peppers, we wouldn't have seeds to plant without bees doing the cross-pollination. The value of bees in agriculture is enormous.
If honeybees are so valuable, why are they not seen as a greater priority and why are they feared?
I think, like so many things around us, they're rather taken for granted. Most people think of bees and think of either honey, which is sweet, or stings, which are sore. But man has always valued bees, going right back to Stone Age time when the wild hive in the cave was protected as almost private property, and the use of wax, honey, and was absolutely essential to their survival. They feared today because of the pain that stings can inflict. And bees will sacrifice themselves to protect their hive, and people who interfere with their hives will be stung. And our African bees, in order to survive, have become particularly aggressive. They're often known nowadays as the killer bee, but they're really not aggressive, it's defensive behavior. They are protecting their hive with their lives.
What are the threats to honeybees today?
Honeybees, like all of nature, is seriously threatened. We have changes in the world, climate, we have shortage of trees, a lack of forage, and bees are also part of that whole picture. Bees are dying out, especially in the northern hemisphere. And because we need bees more and more for agriculture, there's a sense of urgency to protect the bees, to make sure that we can keep the food supply that we so depend on today. So bees are threatened. Pesticides, modern farming, monocultures. We don't know the effect of electric waves, radio waves, cell phone towers. All these things are bound to affect bees adversely.
This is the room I have never been in. This is the room I could never breathe in. The black bunched in there like a bat. No light, but the torch and its faint Chinese yellow on appalling objects. Black asininity, decay, possession. It is they who own me, neither cruel nor indifferent, only ignorant.
Bearing the threats in mind, what can we do to mitigate the stresses on bees?
Well, the first thing is just to enjoy them, to aesthetically appreciate their buzzing in your garden. South Africa doesn't have a very rich forage for bees, so any bee plants that you put in your garden that are bee friendly are welcome and will encourage bees and help feed them in times of stress. These sort of plants are things like lavender, poppies, anything with rich nectar and pollen, aloes. All those sort of plants would help bees in times of need for them. Other trees that are useful, jacarandas and pollen and nectar bearing plants. There's a very good book called Bee Plants of South Africa, published by Sanby, and that would be a good reference to find out what each plant bears for nectar and pollen.
What are the benefits of having a hive in your garden?
Keeping bees in gardens has become very popular, especially in Europe, but it's also popular in South Africa, and it's a growing phenomenon. Things like flow hives and hives in gardens make a good addition to gardens. They pollinate the vegetables, they work on the flowers, they gather nectar, they create an atmosphere of normality and nature in your garden. The one proviso about South Africa is that you need to be aware that our bees are a little aggressive, and you need to take precautions that they are safe and at a good distance from boundaries and not going to cause any upset in the neighborhood. Should you want to learn more about bees and start keeping bees in your garden, it's really advisable to do a course to get a bit of knowledge before you just jump in at the deep end. Honeywood, we offer courses here. If you'd like to contact me or the farm, let me know and we'll organize something for a course that you can fit into.
This is the time of hanging on for the bees. The bees, so slow I hardly know them, filing like soldiers to the syrup tin. To make up for the honey I've taken, Tate and Lyle keep them going. The refined snow, it is Tate and Lyle they live on instead of flowers. They take it. The cold sets in.
can people find out more about beekeeping?
There are, of course, many ways of finding out about beekeeping. The first and obvious way is through books, and just from the social media, from the various sources, you can glean an enormous amount of information. Then, of course, there are learning from others, learning from beekeepers. Beekeepers are generally very willing to share their knowledge through associations, through informal gatherings, through formal gatherings. But ultimately, if you really want to get to grips with bees, you need to work with them. Nothing can take the place of practically opening a hive, experiencing bees, understanding the feel of bees knocking against your veil, and opening up and seeing honey and the wonders of what the hive consists of. That is really the best learning experience.
Can anyone keep honeybees? If so, are there rules and regulations that one needs to be aware of?
Bees are wild creatures. Anyone can keep them. But because of diseases and because managed bees have to be controlled and diseases have to be controlled, every beekeeper is compelled to register as a beekeeper through the department. There is, of course, always a certain amount of knowledge that's necessary, but on the whole, there are no restrictions to people keeping bees.
Now they bawl in a mass, black mined against all that white. The smile of the snow is white. It spreads itself out, a mile-long body of mycen, into which on warm days they can only carry their dead. The bees are all women, maids and the long royal lady. They have got rid of the men, the blunt, clumsy stumblers, the boors.
How can the consumer be sure that what they are buying is in fact real honey from honeybees?
There is a lot of fake, fraudulent, artificial, adulterated honey on the market. This is a huge problem, and it's not always easy to detect. But one of the best ways of actually finding out or feeling that honey is not right is to trust your taste. People just have very sensitive tongues, and if they can pick it up, they will pick up false honey. There are, of course, tests that one can do, quite expensive, and unfortunately each test generally refers to one bottle and not to a whole batch of honey. Fraudulent honey is fraudulent not only to the consumer, but to the honeybees, who have worked so hard to produce honey, and to the beekeepers who've looked after them. To produce one jar of honey, Dr. Lundy discovered, took one bee to fly to the moon and back. That's an enormous amount of work. And to just substitute that with something that isn't genuine and isn't real honey is an insult not only to the consumer and the beekeeper, but to our bees as well.
Why are there so many different flavors of honey?
Honey, by definition, is collected from flowers, and each flower has a different flavor. Each nectar from each flower will give a different kind of honey. The bees actually take the nectar, which is a very high moisture content of about 80%, and they prepare it and preserve it in their hives as 18% moisture, which will last and be able to be stored in their hive just like a housewife preserves peaches in jars. So the different flavors of honey all come from the actual plants that the bees have collected them from.
What are the typical South African honey flavors?
Yeah, the typical South African flavors depend on the flowers on which the bees have worked in South Africa. From the agricultural crops, things like kidney beans, lucerne, canola, those produce definite flavored honeys. Then there are trees, forests. Bluegums produce a lot of our honey. In addition to that, we have the wild honeys, fynbos, the soetdoring, and aloes, which occur naturally in our habitat. So there are numerous different flavors, numerous different flowers that bees collect their nectar from.
Winter is for women. The woman still at her knitting, at the cradle of Spanish walnut, her body a bulb in the cold and too dumb to think. Will the hive survive? Will the gladiolas succeed in banking their fires to enter another year? What will they taste of? The Christmas roses? The bees are flying. They taste the spring.
Thank you for joining us for this short interlude of adventures with bees, gardens with a little bit of magic. I hope your gardens sing loudly with the beautiful sounds of buzzing bees. Goodbye.